One.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's press briefing. I'm Shanda Gallego. Thank you for joining us on our CIGTV channels, as well as on Radio Cayman 89.9 FM. Today's press briefing is on the final results of the 2021 census. We welcome our panelists who will be leading in the discussion today. Premier, the Honorable Wayne Panton, Deputy Premier and Minister for Finance and Economic Development, the Honorable Chris Saunders. We also say good afternoon and we welcome in studio our Economics and Statistics Office ESO Director, Mr. Adolphus Laidlow. We thank members of the media who are joining us in studio as well as on Zoom. Without further ado, we'll now turn our attention to Premier, the Honorable Wayne Panton.
Thank you very much, Shanda. And good afternoon to everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon as we release Census 2021. With this document, we now have clarity on what our population growth has been. No surprises. It reflects a significant rate of growth, consistent with what we have had for some time now. It also shows us that we need to have a very clear idea of what we want in regards to the growth for the Cayman Islands. Some persons may ask, why does population data matter? What is the value of knowing how many people are in the country, who they are in terms of age, gender, education level, occupation, and other characteristics? Ladies and gentlemen, accurate, up-to-date population data is essential to any government to effectively plan and allocate resources. All countries need to know the size and composition of its population to make informed decisions. And it is a widely held view that census data is particularly important for small island developing states such as ourselves, because we have a unique set of circumstances and considerations brought about by a variety of factors, including specifically our geographies. Not just the geography for the Cayman Islands, but I think we all understand that between Cayman and Little Cayman and Cayman Brac, there are differences as well. In addition to age, gender, education, health, and occupation factors, knowledge about where people live helps us plan infrastructure, transportation, and services to best serve our communities. Now, looking at the new census report, we can see that there have been very obvious benefits to the country. But it also shows us that there are significant negatives as well that we need to take into account. We've had unplanned, unrestrained growth effectively, and we've had significant concerns expressed and significant consequences for our people in a variety of areas, including the ability for Caymanians, for example, to find affordable housing. Our growth has resulted in increased costs and is reflected in terms of concerns around significant development. We, as a country, have to decide on what is an appropriate rate of growth and try to design policies that are in line with that instead of just leaving it to the market to generate unrestrained, uncontrolled growth, which is effectively what has happened for some time until now. So the information contained in the census is a critically important tool, a valuable tool in planning the future of the Cayman Islands, helping the public and private sectors as well make decisions about our future that are underpinned by current statistical evidence. The primary highlight of the census is that we can now confirm that the population of the Cayman Islands as of October 2021 was 71,432 persons with an active population of 71,105. This data um, aligns with government's estimate at that time of 71,000, which we were using to um, determine the rate of vaccination during the COVID-19 um, pandemic and the drive to achieve maximum vaccination. Now, in considering the data results of the 2021 census, it is worth considering that the population was estimated to be just over 63,000 in 2017. Um, and if we look back to 1997, it was estimated to be 37,000 at that time. This represents a very significant rate of growth of approximately 26,000 people, or 70% um, over that 20-year period. Imagine 70% growth in 20 years. The 2021 census results show a further growth of 29% in the last decade. So it has been tapering off some. And this growth is largely the result of our open immigration policy and using that policy to support economic growth. This has brought, of course, many opportunities to our country as well, particularly economic opportunities for both the government and the private sector. However, because much of that growth was ad hoc and unplanned, as I noted earlier, it has left us without certain proper systems and structures to optimize our growth, with infrastructure that is we all know struggling to keep up, and a lack of a proper development plan to ensure our sustainable future. In a report entitled Population Scenarios, Past Trends and Future Possibilities, um, the late Dr. Philip Pedley in 2007 noted, few communities have seen their population grow at the rate experienced by Caymanians over the past generation. Modern development in the Cayman Islands, which had its first stirrings in the 1950s, began to affect population growth during the 1960s. But it was not until the 1970s that development had a marked effect on the size of the population. Since then, Cayman's population has continued to rise at a rate that would be considered rapid for any country. But which is perhaps especially significant in a small island nation such as our own. Cayman's population grew 4 times as fast in the 70s as it had in the 60s. This remarkable trend continued year after year. During the 1980s, the population increased by 52%. During the 1990s, it increased by 51%. Since the new millennium, it has climbed a further 30% in 6 years. This is the same rate of growth seen in the 1980s and 90s, a rate apparently unhindered by the economic effects of 9/11 or the ravages of Hurricane Ivan. Taken together, the years 1970 to 2006 witnessed a massive 42% increase in population. Sorry, 428% increase in population. What this means is that a Caymanian born in 1970 has already seen the population of Cayman multiply 5 times. By the time he or she is 50 years old, it will have multiplied 10 times. If the present trend continues, few communities experience growth of this kind in a single generation. That was a quote, as I said, from the late Dr. Philip Pedley. And again, the results of the census show consistency with this rate of growth. And as I said, it has brought us much in the way of economic benefits. It's supported the growth of industries, it's supported the growth of companies, created jobs, and sustained revenues for government. But I think it's incumbent upon us as well to acknowledge that this staggering pace of growth has left many Caymanians and long term residents feeling a sense of frustration. And of course, that is only exacerbated today by the issues we've been having with significant increases in the cost of living, soaring costs of housing, traffic issues, lack of school spaces. So, Dr. Pedley asked an important question in 2007 that I think is relevant today, 15 years later, and that is how will the population of Cayman change in the next 20 years? The question has important implications for every area of government policy and public life, from the number of schools needed to demands on the healthcare system to environmental, social, and infrastructure pressures. Moving forward, we need, as a government, as a country, to have more careful, managed growth, growth that is paced to allow us to leverage the opportunities of growth while addressing the negative consequences of neglect which may have occurred over a period of decades. We can do this by having a very clear sustainable development strategy and plans to guide our development in investments and decision making. This is the challenge and this is the work of this government. A key priority of the PAC government is to improve the social conditions and standard of living for persons with disabilities and older persons in our society. The information we glean from the census will help us ensure that the vulnerable members of our community are able to assess or access the services and assistance they need. With the new census information, we now have information on persons who are outside the labor force, information on older persons, persons with disabilities, veterans, persons in households with food security issues, and those without health insurance, for example. Having this information is going to be valuable, very valuable in assisting our government to be able to work for you, the people of the country. And it will also help the many hardworking community-based groups, the NGOs, to better understand and serve the people they help as well. To the staff of the Ministry of Finance, the Economics and Statistics Office, my colleague, the Deputy Premier and Minister for Finance and Economic Development, amongst others. I want to say thank you all for a job well done. To all community workers who were involved, thank you. Thank you to our community who participated in and supported this census. I think many of us, including myself, spent the time to sit with those conducting the surveys to obtain this very valuable information for us, and it is all going to be for the benefit of our country and our communities. So thank you very much for sharing your data with us. I urge everyone to take some time to read the report and use the data in planning and decision making, just as government will be. And let us all use this data for the collective good of all who call our beloved Cayman Islands home. Thank you. May God continue to bless our Cayman Islands. And I will then turn you over to my colleague, the Deputy Premier and Minister for Finance and Economic Development.
Thank you, Premier. Good afternoon, everyone. I also want to start off by thanking all of you for attending the press conference here today. As you may recall, this census was done under very challenging circumstances. I too would also like to thank everyone that opened their doors and welcomed the census workers into their homes. The information gathered during the census will guide many policies for this government going forward. Recognizing the historic nature of the census document, I'm also pleased to report that the names of all individuals that made this census report possible is actually included in the report, all 436 of them. In short, it took 436 people to make this report possible today. And on behalf of the government and the people of the Cayman Islands, I want to thank them for their service and contributions. I actually also want to thank their families too, because in many instances, again, during the COVID environment, when we didn't have what it is we have today, their families also sacrificed their time and gave up a lot. They gave up a lot of time for their parents to go out and do it. So I just want to thank the families also. Ladies and gentlemen, my colleagues and I in this part government believe that our people are our most significant asset, economic asset, and that's the reason why we're a people-driven government first and foremost. As Deputy Premier and Minister for Finance and Economic Development, as well as Minister for Border Control and Labor, my overriding mission is to ensure that we have the best economy that is private sector driven, where our people can live the best life that they want for themselves and their families. As I said many times before, in order to make informed decisions, we need to have information. And I cannot stress enough the importance of actually having accurate information. And again, I want to thank everyone that took the time out to share their personal data to allow us to make these collective, to have this report so we can at least make some decisions going forward. As the Premier touched on earlier, when we took office, we faced many criticism for using a population number of 71,000 to determine our vaccination target. The census confirmed that we use the right number, and I must say that when it comes down to the safety and security of our people, this government will not be afraid to make the difficult decisions. So again, I know people are giving us a hard time for it, but I'm glad to see that we stuck with the right number despite a lot of the naysayers at the time. As many of you would be aware, population trends and quality of life indicators are very important when planning new programs and initiatives, as well as evaluating ongoing programs. It is this information that guides the provision of many government services that are provided to the public in such areas as education, healthcare, and infrastructure. It is these trends that allow us to determine how many students we will have, their ages, and as such, how many classroom, how many teachers, how many assistant teachers, and other administrative staff that will be required. Equally, it also helps us to forecast key health indicators, and yes, the number of doctors, the number of nurses that will be required to care for our population. As I said before, we need information to make informed decision, and that is why we're so grateful to the hundreds of census workers and the thousands of residents that took the time out to complete the census survey. We cannot serve the public without information and feedback from the public. So again, thank you. Equally, I am pleased to report that the 2021 census included areas that were not previously included in past censuses, such as literacy rate, a more comprehensive set of questions on disability, measuring duration and severity, and associated illnesses. It also included information on public and private schools, is now separated in the census 21. We also looked at the mode of transport to school, mode of transport to work, capturing the location of their residences and location of the schools and their workplace, as this will also help us with transportation and road infrastructure planning. We also looked at environmentally friendly activities of household, like such as sorting and composting. We also look at number of household employees, renewable energy production for sale to the national grid, incidents of crime, and what proportion of crime reported to the RCIPS. We also looked at household engagement and agriculture and fishing. And lastly, we looked also at household food insecurity measure. In other words, persons going to bed without food. Again, these are metrics that we're looking at now that were not included in past censuses. We believe that these additional metrics will assist us in calculating our HDI, or Human Development Index. This government believes that while traditional economic metrics still have a purpose, those metrics need to be supplemented by other qualitative metrics that measure the quality of life for our people. Like you, all of us in the park government believe that there's a disconnect between the quality of our economy and the quality of life for our people, and one of our goals since taking office was to improve our data collection that focuses on quality of life. I would like to pause at this moment to publicly thank the team at the Economics and Statistics Office that is competently led by Director Adolphus Laidlaw, who is also here today. From early on, Director Laidlaw recognized the focus of the government and proactively made the necessary adjustments in data collection and data reporting to help us on this journey of measuring the quality of life for our people. So again, Director, I want to thank you and your team in that regard. As some of you may recall, the census questionnaire was broken down into the following 12 sections. Section 1, demographic characteristics. Section 2, disability and health insurance. Section 3, school attendance. Section 4, highest grade completed and examination passed. Section 5, marital and union status. Section 6, fertility. Section 7, employment. Section 8, housing. Section 9, mortality. Section 10, immigration. Section 11, crime. And Section 12, agriculture and fishing activity and food security. Some of the highlights are as follows. The first area I want to highlight is Section 1 that looked at demographic characteristics. In this section, we looked at the population broken down by age, sex, status, religious denomination, language spoken at home, country of birth, district, to name a few. As the Premier noted earlier, the final results show that 71,432 residents were counted in the 2021 census. This included 327 persons in institutions such as prison, dorms, retirement homes, etc. The non-institutional population was 71,105. In 2010, when the last census was completed, the non-institutional population was 55,036. Compared to 2010, the population increased by 16,069 persons, or 29.2%. The majority of the non-institutional population lived in Georgetown, which was 34,921, or 49.1% of the population, followed by West Bay with 15,335 persons, or 21.6% of the population, Bordentown at 14,845, or 20.9% of the population, the Sister Islands at 2,257, or 3.2% of the population, Northside at 1,902, or 2.7% of the population, and East End 1,846, or 2.6% of the population. Compared to the 2010 population, Bordentown recorded the highest growth rate at 40.8%. This was followed by West Bay with a growth rate of 36.6%, East End 31.2%, Northside 28.6%, and Georgetown 24.3%. The Sister Islands actually saw a decrease of 1.7% when compared to the 2010 census. Additionally, of the 71,105 persons that made up the active population, 35,984, or 50.6% of the population were men, and 35,058, or 49.4% of the population were women. This is actually a slight reversal from the 2010 census, where 49.5% of the population were men and 50.5% were women. The majority of the country's population belongs to the working age group, which by international convention is anyone above the age of 15, with a count of 57,360, or 83.3% of the country's population. Children 14 years and under total 11,451, or 16.7% of the population. The elderly, 65 years old and above, total 5,414, or 7.9% of the total population. This resulted in the Cayman Islands having a dependency ratio of 31.52%, which is well below the global estimate of 54.67%. In layman terms, the dependency ratio looks at the people in our society that are economically active versus those who are generally not economically active. The reason I use the term generally not is in recognition that there are many people in our community that are above the age of 65 that are still economically active. Among the 5,414 persons that were above the age of 65, 4,699 or 87% were Caymanians. It should also be noted that of the 5,414 persons above the age of 65, that 1,814 or 33.5% are still working. Of those that are not working, 23.1% mostly dependent on your pension, 17% mostly dependent on savings and investment, 8.7% on social services, and others dependent on their spouse and other relatives for financial support. The average age of the population was 44, and the median age was 38. The next area I want to highlight is Section 2 that looked at disability and health insurance. In this section, we looked at the incidence of medically diagnosed illnesses by type and disability, as well as level of insurance coverage and type of insurance coverage, to name a few. Some of the highlights are as follows. The top two disabilities are sight, with an incident rate of 35 per 1,000, and lower limb disabilities with an incident rate of 31.1 per 1,000 persons. Additionally, the top three illnesses leading to disability were diabetes, 46.3 per 1,000, arthritis, 22.2 per 1,000, and cataract, 20.2 persons per 1,000. I just want to as I was going through these numbers, and again we're still going through the data because a lot of data. I couldn't help but notice when I was looking at the top three illnesses that females had actually a larger portion of the in terms of the numbers, and also that when we look at even the illnesses between Caymanians versus non-Caymanians, there was a remarkable difference between the Caymanian having a much higher rate as opposed to the non-Caymanian. So I think this is one of the things that I know for a fact that the Minister of Health will be looking at, because this kind of shows that maybe there's a lifestyle or cultural issue, whether it be our diet or whatever it is, but that is something that we definitely need to look at. So, and I know Minister Turner is tuned in, and I know this is something she's keen on doing also. Among the population, 93.1% had health insurance, 5.3% had no insurance coverage, and 0.2% were deemed uninsurable. We also had 1.4% that basically didn't answer the question, so it was kind of hard to see what it was. It should be noted that 73.6% of the population was insured by domestic health providers, and another 18% by government. In the area of school attendance, which is Section 3, when we look at this area, we found that a total of 14,664 residents attended school, either locally or overseas, where 12,576 were full-time, 1,877 were part-time, and 212 were homeschooled. As noted earlier, one of the areas that we added to the census survey is that was not in previous surveys, was that of literacy rate. I'm pleased to report that a person 10 years and older, the literacy rate was recorded at 98.6%. This is quite remarkable when considering that the global literacy rate is estimated at 86.3%, and the literacy rate in Latin America and the Caribbean is estimated at around 94.5%. So in essence, the literacy rate here in the Cayman Islands is above that at the global level, and also above that between the Latin America and the Caribbean area. Staying in the area of education, as we move to Section 4, that surveyed the highest grade completed and examination pass. Among the examination pass, the top three completed examinations were bachelor's degree, 17.9%, vocational trade certificate or diploma, 13.9%, followed by high school diploma or equivalent certificate at 9.1%. This is one area that I must state that when we look at it, we actually have a higher proportion of our population holding university degrees, professional designation, vocational training, and associate degrees. Compared to the 2010 census, the percentage increased from 45.5% in 2010 to 52.3% in 2021 of our population that had above a post-secondary education. So again, we're trending in the right direction. This is a number that the government is committed to improving, and the reason why education is broad outcome number one in our strategic policy statement. and why the government is committed to seeing both UCCI and ICCI becoming free for all our citizens. Section 5 dealt with of the census report. We looked at the survey results relating to marital and union status. Among residents aged 15 years and older, 50.5% were legally married, 38.3% had never been married, 7.6% were divorced, 2.9% were widowed, and 2.1% were legally separated. I will admit that I honestly considered highlighting more of those stats to make conversation amongst our population more interesting, but decided not to when considering the next year that I'll be briefly highlighting, which is section 6 that deals with fertility. But I can guarantee you it was quite interesting in the marital status and union section. So again, I encourage people to take a look at it. In section 6, the survey results revealed that approximately 51.7% of all female aged 15 to 49 years are mothers. The prevalence of motherhood among the different age groups are as follows. Teens 15 to 19, 1.7%. Ages 20 to 24, 17.6%. Ages 25 to 29, 33.9%. Ages 30 to 34, 49.8%. And ages 35 to 39, 66.7%. For females aged 40 to 49, over 73% are mothers by that age. Additionally, while the overall replacement fertility rate was 2.0, the actual replacement fertility rate amongst Caymanian women was 2.1, which is on the positive side, as it shows that Caymanian women today are able to generate stability in our population going forward. I just want to pause to kind of just touch on that area a little bit. When we look at like the fertility replacement rate, I think we can all agree that it takes two people, male and female, to make a person. So in essence, if you have a fertility rate or replacement rate of 2.0, it means that when those two people transfer to another life or the time year has expired, they at least would have replaced with two people. So they leave two people behind to replace them. So if you have a rate of 2.1 and above, it shows that you have a growing population. So in short, 20,000 people would have left 21,000 people behind. So there would have been an additional 1,000 from that initial 20,000. So it shows that you have a growing population. But to further put this number in context, approximately 2 months ago, on the 24th of May, 2022, the National Center for Health in the United States reported a fertility rate of 1.66% for the United States for 2021. The fertility rate in the United States has generally been below the replacement rate since 1971 and consistently below replacement rate since 2007. And again, if you can't generate your own population, this is one of the reasons why many countries would then turn around and have a different type of immigration policies, because if you can't grow your population organically, then you have to do it inorganically by, in a sense, importing a population. So that's why it is important for population planning that we at least have a rate of above 2.0. And in this case, we are actually, the Cayman rate is actually 2.1. Recognizing that we are now in a position to have a future stable population, I want to segue into the next era, which is section 7, that deals with employment. The working age population was recorded at 57,360, of which 47,120 persons were in the labor force, those employed and those persons seeking and available for work. Caymanians comprise of 50.7% of the working age population and 45.2% of the labor force. Total employment registered at total employment was registered at 44,441. Of these, Caymanians accounted for 19,494, or 43.9% of the total employment, while non-Caymanians accounted for 24,947, or 56.1% of the total. The unemployed was measured at 2,679 persons, or 5.7% of the labor force. Unemployed Caymanians were counted at 1,803, while unemployed non-Caymanians numbered 876, resulting in unemployment rates of 8.5% for Caymanians and 3.4% for non-Caymanians. While I recognize that I'm providing the highlights of the census as the minister responsible for finance, I have to change hats briefly and put on my Minister of Labor hat. And based on the preliminary results of the Spring Labor Force Survey, I can now say that the overall unemployment rate has dropped from 5.7% in October 2021 to 3% at the end of June 2022, and that Caymanian unemployment rate has dropped from 8.5% in October 2021 to 5.1% at the end of June 22. This shows that while we are trending in the right direction, we still have more work to do. The top five occupational group, just switching back to the survey, the top five occupational group in terms of total employment were professionals, 18.3%, service and sales, 17.6%, craft and related occupation, 14.1%, elementary occupations, 13.3%, technicians and associate professionals, 12.6%. Altogether, these five groups accounted for 75.9% of total employment and 63.9% of Caymanian employment and 85.6% of non-Caymanian employment. The top five industries in terms of employment were construction, 14.2%, wholesale and retail, 11.5%, professional, scientific, and technical activities, 10.5%, financial and insurance activities, 8.2%, and public administration, 7%. These altogether account for 51.4% of total employment, 59.9% of Caymanian employment, and 44.8% of non-Caymanian employment. In short, the top five industries had more Caymanians employed than non-Caymanians. Financial services, professional, scientific, and technical activities and public administration of the top five industries had more Caymanians than non-Caymanians. In 2021, the country had an overall average earnings of 49,611, which made up of Caymanians were 55,000 in terms of average earning 320, non-Caymanians was 45,594, and amongst males it was $51,724 per annum, and females 47,241 per annum. Additionally, the overall median earnings for the country was $35,994. In layman terms, this means that 50% of the population earned above $35,994, and 50% of the population earned below $35,994. And in this case, the median income for Caymanians were $45,594, and non-Caymanians $31,194. Putting back on my Minister of Labor hat, there was one thing that jumped out to me, and that is the number of women that were actually employed in the construction industry, which was 501. While this number represented only 8% of the jobs in the construction industry, the average earnings for women in the construction industry was $44,990 versus $40,618 for men. In short, the women in the construction industry were on average earning more than the men, so I think that's something that was quite interesting for me. And the top five average earnings by industry were professional, scientific, and technical activities, which is in essence the accountants and the accounting and legal profession. The average was 89,417. Financial and insurance activities, 81,517. Information and communication, $72,045 per annum. Real estate activities, $67,414. Electricity, gas, steam, and air conditioning supply, $61,627. Human health and social work activities, $60,603 per annum. And public administration and defense, compulsory social security, $58,609 per annum. Additionally, I was a bit surprised at some of the earnings by gender and nationality within the same industry. While I'm aware that there may be positions within at different levels of seniority, nonetheless, we need to make sure that it is indeed based on seniority or type of role and not on anything else. I raise this issue to say that while this government cannot guarantee equal outcome, what we'll continue to push for is equal opportunities. Again, I implore all employers and managers to ensure that people are treated fairly and equally and paid equally when performing the same roles. Moving on to Section 8 that dealt with household and housing characteristics. The number of households in the Cayman Islands increased by 6,939 or 30.5%, went from 22,760 in 2010 to in the 2010 census to 29,699 in the 2021 census. During the same period, the average household size declined slightly from 2.42 persons in 2010 to 2.39 persons in 2021. The census survey also revealed that at least 56.7% of all households in the Cayman Islands had housing insurance in 2021. Amongst the district, households in Town were most likely to be insured 60.8%, followed by Georgetown 58% and West Bay 57.1%. However, the reverse was found in the other districts of Northside, East End, and the Sister Islands, where the majority of homes had no house insurance. However, I might add that of the 29,699 households, 20.4% of them were owned with no mortgage, and that Cayman Brac at 34.5%, Northside at 33.2%, and East End at 33% were the districts that had the highest household ownership without a mortgage. So, not to say that they go together, but I just had to look up that stat to see exactly why people in East End, Northside, and the Sister Islands didn't have that much house insurance, but then I realized they owned their own house. So maybe that's the reason, I don't know. But we'll deep dive into it. Of the 229,699 households counted in the 2021 census, 659 or 2.2% households were engaged in the production of solar renewable energy, of which 462 was for sale to the national electricity grid, while another 179 households produced renewable energy for household use only. Approximately 71.8% of households purchased locally produced food, and 63.9% used energy efficient bulbs. Purchasing reusable household items was common among 53.6% of households, and 44.6% reported purchasing eco friendly or green products. Recycling and some sort of refuse were more commonplace, with 36.1% of households engaging in this activity in 2021. In the area of, we'll just moving on to Section 9 that looked at mortality. In 2021, the number of persons reported as deceased during the year before Census Day was 229. 54.6% were males, while the other 45.4% were females. Consistent with the population distribution, most deceased persons were from Georgetown, followed by Town and West Bay. The age group of the deceased was predominantly person aged 60 years or older, while 82.5% of the deaths occurred in the Cayman Islands. Moving on to Section 10, we looked at immigration. Of the 98 persons who immigrated from the Cayman Islands since the 2010 census, the majority occurred in the last 2 years, 56.1%, while, another 25.5% left these shores more than 5 years ago. The destination of choice for persons who immigrated was the United States of America, followed by the United Kingdom and Canada. The main reasons cited for migration were education, 52%, job opportunities, 17.3%, and family reunification, 10.2%. In Section 11, on the subject of crime, the crime rate in the Cayman Islands stood at 24.7 crimes per 1,000 persons 15 years and older. Broken down by district, Georgetown, 26.4 per 1,000, West Bay, 22.7 per 1,000, Town, 27.1 per 1,000, Northside, 23.9 per 1,000, East End, 10.1 per 1,000, and the Sister Island, 9.1 per 1,000. In the 12 months leading up to the 2021 census, victims of crime amounted to 1,428, which is 2.5% of the working population. The age group that ranged from 20 to 59 were the primary victims of crime and accounted for 75.5% of individual and household crimes. The reason why I actually touch on this subject is actually I wanted to include the part I'm going to put here right now. And additionally, of the 1,428 total crimes committed during the last year leading up to Census Day, victims reported 974, or 68.2%, to the Royal Cayman Islands Police, which implies another 31.8% remained unreported as of Census 2021. Female victims of crime report to RCIPS 70.1% of the time, while males reported 66.3%. This is important for us as a community where we need to report crime. The RCIPS plays a very valuable role in our community, and to have this much percentage of crime not being reported is really an incident. And as a community and as a country, this is something that we can't become insensitive to. Too many other countries have gone on that road where people became insensitive to crime, and it's a monster that once it gets out, it cannot be tamed. So I want to encourage every single person, every single citizen to do your job and report crime. The police needs their information to make us keep our streets safe. Just moving on to section 12, which is the last section of the census. The We realized that the COVID-19 pandemic raised concerns that adequate food supplies would not reach consumers as supply chains face multiple challenges. The preservation of agri-food system helps to ensure food security, nutrition, and people livelihood. The 12 months preceding the 2021 census showed that 18.7% of households embraced agriculture and fishing activities. The Sister Islands agriculture and fishing activities were the highest amongst the district, with 41.9% household engagement. Bontown, Eastern, and North Side households engagement in agriculture and fishing ranged between 27 to 30%, while Georgetown with 30.1% and West Bay with 18.2% were the lowest. Overall, most households were engaged in only agriculture activities, 47.8%, followed by only fishing with 36.8%. Food insecurity is the disruption of food intake or eating patterns because of a lack of money or other resources. It is essential to know that hunger and food insecurity are closely related. Hunger refers to personal physical sensation of discomfort, while food insecurity refers to a lack of available financial resources for food at the household level. And this is one of them that we actually added to the census. And food security in the Cayman Islands was 2.2%, or 652 households. In response to the question, was there ever no food to eat of any kind for any member of this household due to lack of resources to get food for at least one day in the past 4 weeks? 652 households answered yes, and another 673 did not respond. At the district level, Georgetown recorded 1.8%, West Bay 2.1%, Bordentown 2.7%, Northside 4.5%, Eastern 4.5%, and the Sister Islands 2.3%. Naturally, this is a serious area of concern for this government, and one of the reasons why we pushed the school meal program from very early on. However, there's still work to be done, and we'll be working with other private sector organizations to ensure that nobody that calls the Cayman Islands home should go to bed hungry. While we accept that not everyone in the Cayman Islands can be rich, equally, we also do accept that nobody in the Cayman Islands needs to be poor. We have too many resources in this country for anyone to be going to bed hungry. And I know this is one of the things that is also near and dear to many of my colleagues. And there is some legislative changes that we need to kind of look at to see how that would probably help in that regard, but we'll probably touch on that later on. Ladies and gentlemen, I have presented the main highlights from the 2021 census report, except for those in the marital status area, which I moved away from. However, there's far more information in the report and even more detailed information that can be generated from the census database. The report, as well as other data from the database, will be made available soon. Therefore, I encourage everyone, whether in the public sector, the private sector, educational institutions, or the general public, to make full use of the census information in their planning, decision-making, and studies. The 2021 census data serves as a critical forward planning tool. It allows the country to benchmark our performance as a society and measure how we meet the aspirations of our citizens. It is an invaluable information source for dialogue between the government, the private sector, and broader civil society. Our collective aim moving forward is to address the challenges posed by the data in this report and formalize socio-economic policies using empirical evidence. I urge all residents to take the time and read this comprehensive report. It will serve as a foundation of evidence-based policy at the government level and is indeed vital to decision-making at every level of society, including investment and business decisions. In keeping the 2021 census theme, Everyone Counts, the government will use this 2021 census report as our key reference while we work to continue the economic prosperity and social harmony our beloved Cayman Islands have long enjoyed for the present and future generations. Thank you all very much, and sorry for all of those percentages too.
Thank you to Premier and Deputy Premier for your remarks and the main highlights of the 2021 Census of Population and Housing report. At this time, we now turn to members of the media with questions, and we begin now with Cayman News Service.
Thanks,
Good afternoon,
Shonda.
Wendy.
I've tried to consolidate the questions. I'm not sure who I should go to first on this one, but I think it's probably the Premier because he was the one that said we need a clear idea about growth. So, given the results of the census, can you tell the people what you see as being the too much growth, like what those figures are, and what you intend to do about growth, given that everything we seem to do here encourages people to come and to stay, i.e. the need to buy property and all of that sort of thing to get PR points.
Right.
Hello?
Yes, Wendy, I heard you.
Thanks.
You always seem to be coming from behind the curtain there, but
Yeah, that's
yes. Fine. Thank you very much for that. Obviously, there's a lot of information that has been provided by the report. My colleague, the Deputy Premier, highlighted quite a number of areas. All of this is going to be instructive for us to help us, as he noted, and as I noted originally, to plan and to put in place policies that drive the right sort of results, the right positive benefits, the right outcomes for the country. Where we know there are issues, there are concerns from the people in the country, we can use this information to help to create policies which drive a better result, drive a result that is more reflective of what they feel is appropriate for the country. It may also be that, for example, we engage, and it's something that I personally advocate for, undertaking a program similar to what we did in 2008, except doing it in a, I think, without the inherent defects of that initiative at that time, which was, you'll recall, Wendy, Vision 2008. It is important for the people of the country to have input on what they feel are important outcomes and what direction the country should be going in, what it is they want to see on a longer term basis. And I think, we should be undertaking an exercise like that, but using this information, using this excellent data that we have obtained to both help us develop policies which drive the right outcomes, as I said, but also, as the DP mentioned, use it as a benchmark. Where are we starting off, and what are the outcomes that we're going to measure down the road? We do this every 10 years, but in the interim, we have lots of economic reports. We have the labor force surveys that are twice a year. You've heard some of the information from the spring labor force survey, and that will certainly be reduced. It will certainly be produced and published as well shortly. But all of this information is very relevant to us to ensure that we can make plans which reflect the wishes of the people of the country, which reflect the best outcomes that we can benchmark for ourselves and benchmark internationally to show that the people of the country itself and the people of the country are actually improving in terms of their quality of life, their standard of living, and the success of the country overall.
Sorry, can I just press you on that concept of, like, now we know, like, 71,000 people. Is that enough? Is that too many? Is that not enough? Is there a figure?
To be honest, I think it's always going to be difficult to say, what a figure is, or if there is a figure. It's always going to be a difficult question. That is not necessarily going to be. There's not necessarily a static answer. To me, it has to be a reflection of what people in the country feel. How are we succeeding? How are we improving the quality of their life? Are we getting the balance right? Are we maintaining the balance between development and protection and promotion of the environment? We all know that there's no planet B for us, so we have to find a way for us to have the right balance so that we can live and succeed within the world that we live in. So it's going to be hard to give you a number.
Okay, fair enough. It's just that I know that's such a predominant talking point.
It is.
It's what has actually jumped out at you from the figures that is perhaps the most unexpected or the most concerning that you think will be now a priority for your government to address?
I think I'm going to ask Deputy Premier to answer that question, because he has delved more into the details. I mean, we have just sort of gotten the results and these details on this report, and it's going to take some time for us to assimilate those and digest that information. But I was not surprised at all at the population number. There are certain other areas that I think people will find that their old notions and assumptions may perhaps be displaced. I think one of the things that DP pointed out was the fact that the balance in the genders has shifted, which I probably didn't expect myself. But Deputy Mayor, you want to?
Yeah, I think the one number that, if I was to give you the headline, Wendy, while I mean there are many things to consider, the one number that really threw me for a curveball was the health number in terms of the diabetes, the arthritis, and everything else. And when you do look at the breakdown between Cayman versus non-Cayman in those numbers, it was quite significant in terms of the difference. And also when you look at the numbers between male and female, it was also noticeably different, with the females being higher. As you're aware, one of the basic functions of any government is ensure that you have an educated and healthy population. So while our education is trending in the right direction with regards to people becoming qualified, in terms of, you look at the population from 45% in 2010 to over 52% in 2021, it is trending in the right direction, and we have more young people finishing school. But when we do look at the health side of it, which is one of the other pillars, especially in a service-based economy, then that is for us one of the areas that we definitely have to deep dive in, because we are, if we look at our economic structure, we're primarily a tertiary. We have a primarily tertiary economic structure where 95% of our population makes their living and provide to the country by providing a service. And people can't provide a service or provide for their families if they are unhealthy. So that is one of the things that really jumped out at me, and that's one of the things I've been looking for to Minister Turner in terms of working with. Now, when we look at the Ministry of Health and Wellness, one of the things that we also wanted to start expanding on is in the area of wellness, in the sense of finding ways to encourage more people to be healthy. I mean, we had this debate in caucus on Monday's premier. Don't worry, I won't repeat what I said. I'll say it. God made a few perfect people. The rest are slim, is what I said to my colleagues. But it is one of the things, though, nonetheless, that we need to do more in terms of health for our people. So me drinking a Japina, for those in the audience who have seen it, is not really the healthiest of thing to do, but I like Japina. So at least I have some cheating. But no, Wendy, to answer your question, the health numbers are of concern for us.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. I'm trying to consolidate these questions. I've got two there that were very similar, so I'm just going to move on. Another one, which I think is important, given the talking points about whether we should be allowing foreign investors to buy property in Cayman, because we know a few countries have sort of begun to pull back on that. Has this census given us the numbers of how many households in the Cayman Islands actually belong to overseas residents? Have we managed to get that number in this census?
Short answer, Wendy, is we probably can find something in the database, because we can tell if the head of the household is Caymanian or not. But one of the things, just roughly, when we did look at just the mortgage section alone, because we were actually trying to determine what percentage, because we do have a large percentage of the population that is actually in rental accommodations. And we're actually trying to determine within my ministry what percentage of those rental accommodations were actually owned by, say, Cayman versus non-Cayman. But what I can say, when we actually did look at the homes that were with mortgage and without mortgages, 80% of the homes were actually owned by Caymanians. So if there's any indication, what we can say, just looking at that section, it was roughly 80-20, thereabouts. Not know the exact number, but it's something that we looked at, because we also wanted to determine in terms of the impact if you're a Caymanian and you're in the rental business, because it is, like I say, a good significant amount of the population do actually rent. What would happen to those Caymanian families, if their tenants leave, and then equally, what impact would that have on banking defaults and all that kind of stuff. So it is one of the areas that we are deep diving in. But what I can say to you is that when we did look at it initially, roughly around 80% of homes between mortgage, owned with mortgage and owned without mortgage, were actually owned by Caymanians. If we just want to use that and maybe it'll extrapolate, I don't know.
But that means that you don't know who owns the rental, who owns the properties that people are renting. In other words,
that was one of the.
Right.
I mean, ultimately, we can probably scan the Lands and Survey database and match it across immigration. That's also the default position. But like I said, just using a small sample, it was roughly 80% Caymanian ownership in terms of the mortgage market or in terms of the homes, that kind of stuff.
Right. Okay. The other one is the unemployment figures, which is obviously you've already said that the spring figures are going to be better than the ones in this census. But we have all of these complaints at the moment that companies can't find anybody, and they can't get work permits, and they can't get this, and they're having all sorts of problems with finding people to work. But we're still talking, even the best case scenario, of like a more than 5% unemployment rate amongst Caymanians at a time of really, really high inflation and, supposedly a big jobs markets around the world. How do you explain that?
Well, it is a global challenge. I mean, pure in terms of finding people. I remember, I think when Delta came in, I was at the airport. I think it was Delta, one of those US airlines. And they had basically said, I mean, they had planes that were parked up in the desert simply because they could not find pilots. And they had actually mentioned to us that, I think it was Delta, that they had like 70,000 employees retired during the COVID period. So it is like it's a global issue in terms of the challenge that we have, because some people actually left the workforce during the COVID period. I mean, the government in the US was one of the biggest drivers of global inflation, when in essence they started paying their citizens more money than they would have made on welfare, and people decided, it was just cheaper for me to stay home and collect a check from the government as opposed to go back to work. So you did have people who actually left the global workforce willingly. So it is a challenge, not just the Cayman, but it is something that at this point right now, it is a challenge. Now, our job or our goal right now is to get as much as our people trained, developed, and moved into the workforce. And anyone that is willing and able to work, that want to be work, then our job is to go out and find them work. So the number is trending in the right direction, but we also have to recognize that the tourism industry is not fully back as to where it is, because there's a difference between someone also being employed, and this is the point that we are making, and the premier touched on earlier, is that being employed is one, but the question is, and that's why I took the time out to look at the industries that actually paid the most, look at the professions that actually paid the most, is that's where you want to encourage your people to get to. So it is a situation where when you look at the industries and recognize that the top 5 industries, despite Caymanians being the minority in the private sector, is is still dominated or still majority with Caymanians in those sector. So then the question is, how many more can we can get into those different sectors? That's where we want. So it's not just a matter of finding people job, but also finding people quality of job that they can live the quality of life that they need.
Okay. I've got more, but I'll let Reshma go next.
Thank you, Wendy. And now we call upon Cayman Campus. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
So, Premier, I just want to go back a little bit to what Wendy touched on. I know you said, in particular, reference to the number. You said in your remarks that the open immigration policy and ad hoc development has contributed to the population stat that we're seeing today. The previous administration had talked about a target of, say, 100,000 population as an ideal target. Is the PAC government working towards that goal of 100,000, 90,000? Because naturally, we would still need to have a cutoff point.
Reshma, to be honest, I mean, as Wendy noted earlier, there are people who might feel today that this population of 71,000, which actually is perhaps a little bit, it's actually probably a little bit higher now, given the period of time between which we did the survey and the numbers of work permits that have been actually granted with people coming back in to the tourism workforce. The population might be a little bit higher now. There are people today who feel that this is a number that is, fine, enough. Some may even argue it's too high. So, to suggest that a number of 100,000 is the right number, to me is no less arbitrary than saying this number right now is the right number. So I don't subscribe to that sort of perspective, but I do subscribe to the view that everything we do we should be planning as to the outcome that we're expecting, so that we're able to meet expectations. We're able to ensure that we, as far as possible, can deliver the right balance, the quality of life, the success of the country, the right metrics, the right level of growth as we move along. I don't know, if our population is static, we're going to have either to have continued economic growth, we're going to have increasing productivity. That's either going to come through technology or people just working harder. So this is all a challenge to suggest that you can have a static population and continue to have opportunities, continue to have some economic growth in order to be the engine to create new jobs and this sort of thing. What you want to be able to do, as I said, is to plan it. You want to be able to predict how you move along. None of this is an exact science, of course. Wendy's question earlier about real estate reminds me that, Toronto fairly recently had restrictions put in place on the people purchasing real estate there that aren't resident. Well, they've started to have a downturn in the market there now. So that's obviously they were trying to cool that off, but at some point, some people are going to be saying that's too much. Bottom line is, I don't know that we can ever say what the number should be, but we should be planning and in trying to ensure that it's a reasonable level of growth and not something that is uncontrolled and unpredicted, so that we're behind all the time and trying to catch up in terms of services. Every single ministry, I mean, you have 3 ministries represented here today, but every single one of our colleagues have information that comes out of this report that is important to them, whether it's planning and infrastructure, whether it's education. We've talked about health. There's the Ministry of Investment and Innovation and Social Development. All of these have very important issues that this information adds a background to guide us and where we need to be and how we need to be able to support our people and support the country and support business.
Thank you, Premier. I appreciate that. But just to the point that you raised, the numbers are from 2021, and we've had work permits. You said that the numbers are obviously going to change with work permits and so forth. Any chance those numbers are available that you can share with us today?
I'm not sure that we have any specific numbers available.
We have preliminary
It's
numbers for the spring labor force survey. But one of the things I just want to put out there, and for our people to understand something. Earlier during my presentation, I spoke about the Human Development Index, and that index tried to answer 3 questions. Do we have a decent quality of life? Do we have, we look at our access to education, and we also look at the health and wellness of our people. When we look at decent quality of life, we're talking about things like income, productivity, and economic structure. The Cayman Islands economic structure, while other countries are primary, secondary, and tertiary, we are primarily a tertiary base, which means that we're a service-based economy. Primary is anything like agriculture and mining, things that come out of the door. Secondary is when you convert what comes out of the earth into manufacturing. That's where the plants, the canned stuff processing comes in. And then the tertiary is basically all the sales and all the activities that go with it. We are 95% sales economy. So we don't have oil, we don't have mining, we don't have many things. What we do have, as I said, is our people being our best economic asset. We also need to consider that, one, we have almost 1,000 kids coming to school every year. So we need an economy that at least produces 1,000 jobs every year at a minimum. So when people sit down and say, well, we need to slow down, in essence, in a service-based economy, what you're talking about is slowing down, is job creation. Now, that I think will be a challenge for anyone because, like I said, while we do look at the numbers and for us, the main thing for us is the quality of jobs for our people. It is important that we actually maintain that. Now, for us as a government, our main primary purpose is trying to work towards an equitable, inclusive, but balanced approach in terms of economic development. We deal with issues that social planners refer to as a wicked problem, where you think you're fixing one problem and you go into the next. I have Caymanians that have property that want to sell and have said to me point blank, I want to be able to sell my property to the highest bidder, the person who can pay me the most money, because I have bills to pay. I have a medical bill to pay for some relative, and this is who I want to be able to sell my land to. So there is the people who want to buy the land. There's the people who want to sell the land. Where do we find the balance? And one of the things I must say, and they said that Jimmy Carter was the first U.S. president to find this out, that the office of the president is there to preserve democracy, but the Federal Reserve is there to preserve capitalism. The minute you start getting politicians tinkering into your market and your economic system, it has been a disaster in many countries. So while Keynesian economics may talk about the invisible hand concept, I can say to you as a Minister of Finance, and that's the reason why I stress about being a private sector-led economy, because the government derives its income from the private sector. The minute the government tries to think, or any government think, that they can drive the economy, it has always proved a disaster everywhere else. And I don't need for us to tinker with it to find out. There are too many examples around the world where politicians have overextended themselves into the market system and it turns out to be a disaster. What you don't want is a populist or the populism type of politics. It sounds good, it gives you good sound bites, but it does never work long term. We are where we are for a particular reason, and it is for us to build on the foundation that it is that we have. Because despite our challenges, I can say to anyone, of the 200 plus countries that called it home, this is still one of the best place to live and work on this entire planet. And I would say to people, yes, we do have our challenges. Things are not perfect. You know what I mean? And our goal, as I said before, and the premier said it many times, is to push for equal opportunities, not equal outcomes. And the minute you start trying to change outcomes for people, then that is what impacts productivity and everything else. So it's always something, it sounds good, but we got to be careful. That's all I have to say on that one.
All right, then. Thank you for that, DP. Premier, you also talked about the development plan that goes hand in hand with managing that growth. Where are we with that development plan? I know there was the Plan Cayman initiative under the previous administration for sustainable growth and development. What has happened to that project?
That is still underway. There have been a number of meetings between the planning ministry, my ministry, the lands ministry, and they are in the process of working through what we have to do. But that is as I think everybody will understand and has been acknowledged in the past, is not something that is a 6-month project or a 12-month project. It's unfortunately a multi-year project. So while it is underway, we're not expecting to have the full development plan completed for the country probably until into the next term. So we're at this point, we're probably going to have perhaps half of it done by the end of this term.
And that's the Plan Cayman initiative incorporated.
That is building on that.
Okay. All right. Thank
And
you.
I'm not, I don't know. I don't think it includes necessarily every element of it, but it is certainly building on that because there was good work done initially, and where that is the case, then we build on that and we take it further.
Okay, great. Now, Deputy Premier, you mentioned in your presentation a statistic there that is quite concerning, apart from the male to female ratio and the employment stat, and that's the dependency ratio. We are below, I think it was below, you said?
No, we're 34%, which is, well, it is, in a good way, it is below the global dependency ratio. So it is not a bad ratio in terms of looking at our economically active population versus our non-active population. I still think that number needs to be somewhat adjusted because while it's looking at people below 15 and above the age of 65, we have now shown, especially in Cayman Islands, that at least a third of our people above the age of 65 are still economically active. But nonetheless, to satisfy the international norm, we still look at the ratio, measure international as everyone else. But we do have, in that case, an economically active population. When you look at countries like Japan and I think Germany, for example, countries with some serious dependency ratio issues, that in itself is a problem. Now, they have a lot of countries out there with a lot of aging population. We have, over the years, again, through immigration to some extent, have been able to lower our dependency ratio. Because if I was to take out the dependency ratio and just look at Caymanian versus non-Caymanian, then the number would change significantly. But because of immigration, and I think we all have accepted that our economy is one that needs some level of immigration in order to maintain itself, then I think we're okay in that regard.
Okay, now a part and parcel of that statistic is also the birth rate as well. As your population ages out, are you seeing the number of births that are required to replace that Caymanian workforce that is aging out?
The overall, per the census, the overall fertility replacement rate was 2.0, which is in essence flat. But when we broke it down between nationalities, we found that the actual Caymanian replacement fertility was 2.1, and the non-Cayman was actually 1.9. So that's where the balance came from in 2. So we got the number of 2. But The Caymanian birth rate itself, fertility replacement rate, is 2.1. So that is actually above the number that we actually want to go at. So now you take, for example, the United States, which I referred to, as you need your population to going forward. If they are running at 1.66, roughly below 1.7, it means basically every 1,000, well, I guess every their population isn't replacing itself.
Mhm.
So for them, they'll have to look at maintaining an open immigration policy. For us now, we can have this saying, we can look at say, well, you know what? Because we can now replace our own population organically, and also recognizing the number of jobs and everything else that we'll need, how much kids coming out of school. As we do our forward planning, we can have a little bit more comfort to say we are producing enough now at this point. We have sufficient Caymanians to replace ourselves. Then how do we factor that into the other decision making? So again, like I said, it is a wicked problem because the minute you start saying, okay, we're going to restrict or we're going to hold back, then I'm going to ask you, okay, which industry do you want to do it in? You don't want to be in the financial services, do you want it in tourism, do you want it in construction? I mean, where now do you scale back? And this would be a typical case where you can scale back in any industry as long as it's in a mine. That is the mindset you're going to get from people. I want growth. I want opportunities in my industry. So it is, but I said, we are above countries like the US, we're above the UK, we're above Canada in terms of our actual replacement rate at this point. And I think, kudos to, all the Caymanian women that keep making them babies. I say, keep making them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I want to beg the Premier, because I know the questions are limited, but there is a critical issue, and it's very pertinent to what we're discussing today, the prosperity and the economic growth of the island. We are seeing a tremendous amount of sargassum that has a really serious impact on our future and our economic prosperity as well. What is the government's plan to address what we're seeing that is happening now in the North Sound and around the island?
Reshma, thank you. Clearly there are, and there have been since about 2011, a lot of issues around sargassum. Thankfully, given our orientation, it has had a limited impact on the major part of the tourism, district in the country. But it does obviously impact the eastern side of the island, some parts of the northern coast and parts of the southern coast. And now we've had this major bed of sargassum that has moved into the North Sound. I know recently the former minister for planning and now the deputy leader of the opposition was commenting that he'd left this plan behind and left equipment and all that. Sorry to disappoint people. There is no plan.
One machine.
Yes, a machine, a rake, a beach rake was bought. I presume it came with a tractor. If it didn't, it would have to be connected to a tractor. How does that help in the North Sound, where it is mangrove and it is some iron shore? That doesn't do anything for that. So even if there was a plan associated with it, that's not relevant at all. It's all well and good for people to exaggerate and play political games, but the issue for us right now is, how do we address this issue without causing more damage? I can tell you that as of today, we have been, from I think probably Sunday, we've been trying to mobilize assets within the country to address this issue, and trying to figure out how we could actually accomplish something meaningful, given the circumstances within which this recent incursion has found itself, or shown itself. So this, as of today, a contract was signed for a company to start trying to pump. They have these, what they call trash pumps, that can pump significant volumes of water along with the seaweed in it, and they can pump it into trucks or trailers or areas, vehicles that can dewater the sludge and the what's coming out of the pump, and then leave the seaweed, and they can then remove that. The truth is there is no easy, simple way of addressing this. It has a concern from an environmental perspective, significant environmental concern, but obviously it's a concern in terms of the impact on the neighbors, the people who live in that area, the people who utilize that area for marine activities. And we're trying to work through ways of addressing it. I had the DOE's drone doing a survey this morning again for us to see exactly what it looked like. It has actually shifted further towards the south. You might remember earlier in the week it was actually around the Morgan's Harbor area, going up towards the shores. It's actually shifted a bit more to the south now. So that area around the Morgan's Harbor docks and the 2 restaurants there seems to have cleared up now and it's shifted further to the south. But I think the area in which this pumping exercise is going to be, it's either has been undertaken this afternoon or will be first thing in the morning, is the area of the Garvey Park, I think it's called, and it's right at the end of the road, past the dolphin area there. So they are going to be conducting these tests to work out what kind of success they're having and what kind of volume they're able to achieve utilizing these pumping mechanisms. So we are trying to see exactly what we can do. There is no easy answer to it. There are methodologies that are utilized in other places that could perhaps work in that location, like the vessels with the conveyor belts that sort of run in reverse and collect up the seaweed. Obviously, we don't have those here at this point. We're trying to deal with an issue that needs to be dealt with in a week rather than the month or 2 months that it's going to take to bring in some vessel like that. I've told the Department of Environment team, they'll be working with the planning team, that we need to have in place a specific set of policies and plans to address these different scenarios. This one, we've never seen one with this sort of extent coming into the North Sound. But obviously we have to plan for it the next time and make sure that we either find a way to deflect it, to stop it from coming in, or we find a way to collect it before it just gathers up against the shore and creates these issues. But getting back to the original point, there was no plan to do anything else. We're trying to deal with the problem right now, and I can assure you that everybody's engaged in trying to figure out exactly how to get the best value out of the various methodologies that have been proposed to address this and find a resolution.
Thank you so much for indulging that question. I guess there's a specific budget that you'll be working towards for that.
Well, I don't know. I don't have a particular budget in mind. I mean, it's we're obviously going to have to plan for this. We're going to see exactly how successful this approach is. And then if it's not that successful, we're going to have to figure out what other methodologies are available, and then specifically find the funding, create the budget to address these issues. So this is not the typical case of how do we clean the beach, because we have the equipment to clean beaches. You can't drive those tractors in the North Sound. So it's just a totally different approach and a totally different set of challenges.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Premier, and thank you, Rash. We know that our time is well spent, but with what was presented today, there are a lot of questions, so we thank you for your patience at this time. We will turn over to Caymanian Times with his specific questions and hopefully with brief responses.
much, and good afternoon, gentlemen. I will be brief
Good
today.
afternoon.
First of all, thank you for presenting the census report. I think that the numbers are very important. I'll keep my questions brief. Definitely, we know that the population numbers will continue to grow in the near future. As you mentioned, they're probably higher than it is. Is our national infrastructure prepared to deal with this growth? And I refer to things like healthcare, the roads, and schools, and so on. Can you let me know?
I think, I mean, I'll let DP certainly add what he wants to as well, but just initially, I think from a healthcare perspective, we are probably in a fairly good position. We have a tertiary level facility, and we have other facilities that are constantly improving the level of service. The HSA services are constantly being improved. And interestingly, we have an extremely high number of doctors per capita. So we should be able to address the health needs of our people. But the reality is, as DP pointed out in some of his statistics, is that we do have, non-contagious, I can't remember the exact medical terminology that they use, but, non-contagious diseases that are much more prevalent amongst our Caymanian population. And we need to be ensuring that we can develop through our colleague, Minister Turner's ministry, particularly on the wellness side, ensuring that people don't develop these diseases down the road and then better treating them today for those who have these types of diseases. But I think from that side, we're probably okay. But clearly we have had traffic issues. We've had, we have had the need to build widen roads and do all this type of work that has been ongoing. It is having a positive impact. But I think we all have to accept that the solution is not to continue to try to build roads. We've got to manage the challenge. I think we have to try to manage the growth as best we can and be able to predict and project where we need to be and what we need to be doing, and provide alternatives to people just, getting in individual cars and driving around. That means a significant look at developing public transport and greening transport, from my perspective. And then we have all the other issues that are associated with population growth, which is accommodation, and challenges with young Caymanians being able to find places to buy. So yeah, there are areas where I think we are okay, but there are areas where I think we're clearly behind. And I think the information demonstrates the urgent need for us to make sure that we use this information very well in order to plan and ensure that we are able to meet expectations down the road.
The thing about it is, Ralph, and thanks very much for asking that question. When we start dissecting, and this is why it's important for us to really focus on the quality of life for our people. We do look at even something as simple as gross national happiness, and look at the countries that score quite high. It isn't the countries with the highest GDP, but surprisingly, in some cases, the countries with the highest tax rate, which is always kind of boggling mind. But the thing about it that we need to adjust, and this is where kind of adjusting our culture comes from. I mean, earlier I touched on the issue on the health side. When you dig into those illnesses, you realize that many of them are lifestyle in nature. Many of them are cultural in nature. We love our starches, I mean, at the end of the day, people like the dumplings. No, we're not saying you can't eat the dumplings. I always saying you can do 50 a week, try to cut down to 10. It's about sitting down and finding anything in moderation. Technology have allowed people now, and the pandemic has shown it, where you don't need to be coming into town to work. You can actually stay from home and do the same work. You know, so it's about how do we find productivity and areas for people. Equally, we have never tested our infrastructure in the sense of we have all this development in one area. How do we now move it to other areas where people can, be a little bit more useful? One of the things that the Premier touched on, and this is one of the things in this government that is a concern for us, is housing. Now, when you look at housing, for example, you look at the CPI index. Housing itself is 35% of the CPI. Transportation is at 14%. So those two areas alone that deals with interest rates and deal with fuel are, in essence, 49% of our CPI. So when you hear we get up and say that we want to push the renewables, where we're trying to reduce our dependency on fossil fuel and everything else, the same sun that shines in Cayman is the same sun that shines in China, Germany, Europe, North America is the same sun. Why aren't we, using it more to some extent? No, we spend over $200 million a year buying fuel. If we can cut that number down to half in the next 5 to 10 years and literally have $100 million more in our economy, do you know what that will do in terms of allowing people to do more for their life? Equally, when you look at the housing side, I mean, we just saw the Fed raise interest rates again yesterday. No, we need to have a capital markets developed here in Cayman. I mean, the banks are lending out money for 25, 30 years. Nobody has a deposit on with the banks for 25 to 30 years. So you have overnight money being lent out a long time. That creates liquidity risk. That comes with a cost. And you can't sit down and have over $2 billion worth of loans literally on a variable rate. I mean, that's just madness within itself. Now, at CIDB, despite the prime now going up 75 bips up, we're still offering the 3.75% rate. Why can't we do that? Because CIDB actually has a bond. We're paying 1 point something percent on it. So because we have that steady bond that we're paying 1 point something percent, we can live with a 2% spread and lend that money out at that point. And this is the reason why when you're talking about developing that capital market, when people talk about bringing back the pension money, which is long-term money, yeah, people out there who don't need a pension for the next 25, 30 years. Those are the kind of things that we can now say that, you know what, this is what we can start looking at. When it's kind of ironic, when you look at the 6 metrics that drive gross national happiness that the UN now looks at, the number one of that 6 is social support. People believing that, do they have someone to count on in case of an emergency? No, we don't have a social net, but here's what we do recognize. In a service-based economy, where 95% of our people make their money from providing a service, here is something that people need to think about, and this is what keeps us awake at night. 95% of the families in this country is one medical emergency away from being bankrupt. One. Now, is that something you think that any country can live on? Don't care how nice it is when you lay down a bed at night, you're worried about your health. Something happened to you, what happens to your family? So then the question is, how do we put the social support in place? And no, there are some initiatives that we are working on that hopefully I'll get it past my caucus, and I'm laying the foundation right now to get the premier support for it too. But those are the kind of questions that we need to answer. If we can't do it, then how can we allow or help our people to help themselves? These are the kind of stuff that we need to do. So the infrastructure for us is not just physical. It is also, in a nutshell, mental. And if you look at the definition of health as per the World Health Organization, it is health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not just the absence of disease and infirmity. It is a social and mental well-being that we have for a long time basically abandoned or not focused on, that now we're building up the qualitative metrics. I can say to you right now, from Seneco's standpoint, we are looking at launching a program right now. We want to do an executive medical check on just about every single public servant. Is it going to cost us a lot of money? Yes, it will. But you know what? When we do look at where we spend money in the healthcare cases, 80% of it is on emergencies. And if you go back and you look at people, how do we then allow people to get healthier from long before, go to doctor regularly to get checkup? Even if we have to pay for it, it actually saves us money down the line. So it is the other side of that infrastructure that we also need to fix, which is that qualitative side, and not just the physical infrastructure of roads and everything else. And it's a long runabout question, but like I said, that's the cultural part that we need to change.
And thank you for expounding on all those information. And I'll leave my questions for next time. And before we go, I want to applaud the census team for doing a wonderful job.
Amazing job.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
You're so kind, Mr. Lewis.
Enjoy
Thank you
this.
so much. We've come to the end of today's press briefing, and you are encouraged to head to eso.ky, the eso.ky website, for the full 2021 Census of Population and Housing report. I'd like to thank Premier Honorable Wayne Panton, Deputy Premier and Minister for Finance and Economic Development, Honorable Chris Saunders, as well as Economics and Statistics Office ESO Director Adolphus Laidlow. Members of the media, we thank you as well. And to you, our listening and viewing audience, a reminder that you can watch the press briefing in its entirety on CIGTV's YouTube channel, that is YouTube and Facebook channels. Also, after Radio Cayman 6 p.m. evening news, that is 89.9 FM, 7 p.m. Thank you. Take care and God bless.